In part 4 of the lesson series on how life evolves, we'll make the claim that proteins are adaptations that evolve to serve a purpose. So we've been discussing the case of the red bacteria that can only eat the green food but then evolve the capacity to eat another food source, the orange molecule. And we said that was possible because of a new protein. This channel protein here allowed the importation of the orange food. Well, how did this protein get its purpose to import the orange food? Well, that was an evolutionary story. It evolved to serve that purpose. What does that mean? Well, there were random mutations, and then the conditions of green food shortage favored this kind of protein that could import a new food source. So it does this job because doing that job gave a survival advantage to this individual. We're going to continue the story one more step to illustrate another example of the evolution of a new protein. So here's our individual here capable of eating the green and the orange. And by eating, we kind of just mean importing these food molecules. However, it's not enough to just get the food inside the cell. You have to be able to break the chemical bonds of the food. Let's say the green one is glucose and the orange one is some other sugar. Maybe it's fructose or something. Over here, we see the scenario where we have a protein whose job it's already evolved to break a chemical bond of glucose. But notice that same protein cannot interact with the orange food molecule. So now we have a problem. It's not enough that we have a cell that has evolved the ability to get a new food source in here. You better be able to metabolize it. You better be able to break it down. You need a team of appropriate proteins that can interact with this new food source. And the old protein that was working on glucose will not work on the new food molecule. Well, how's the cell going to solve this problem? Again, we can use an example of gene duplication. Because the protein that acts on glucose, that digestive protein, also has a gene. And again, suppose that gene were duplicated at some point in time. And so we have two versions of that gene. Well, again, this original recipe here only makes the protein that can break a chemical bond of glucose. It will not work on the orange food molecule. But in time, mutations accumulate in the duplicate, perhaps changing the shape a little bit, but still it can't stick to the orange food. That's the first step for a protein to be able to interact with that food molecule. It has to stick to it. But with another mutation, now it sticks to the molecule. But that's still not enough. Just because it's sticky, it doesn't mean it can actually break the chemical bond of the food molecule. But a third mutation does the trick. These are random mutations changing the recipe of the DNA sequence. And that's changing the amino acid sequence and changing the shape of the protein. And now we have a protein that can not only stick to the target molecule, but it can break the chemical bond and release the energy. So now we have a functional protein. So again, this will be natural selection favoring individuals with a new functional protein. Natural selection will tend to preserve the old recipe because the original protein was doing something very useful, breaking down the green glucose molecule. But because of a gene duplication and the accumulation of mutations, we now have the recipe for a new protein that can do something new, can break the chemical bond of the orange food molecule. So this is how proteins evolve to serve a purpose. And when we think about our cartoon cell here, all these different proteins doing different jobs, we want to think it's the same process that we've now learned about in the previous two lessons here. It is mutations in DNA, changing the recipes for proteins, and those proteins that do something useful will give the individual an advantage in the struggle for life, and they will pass on that recipe to their offspring. And every generation there are new mutations, and selection will be favoring proteins that serve a useful purpose. So today we see all kinds of proteins that already have evolved their useful purposes. Those purposes evolved long ago. But new proteins, new genes, and new proteins are evolving all the time. So at this point we can pause and take in some of the key summary points. In the final lesson of the series, we'll examine how natural selection can multiply species over time.